More now on strikes this winter and government plans to keep essential services moving. 1,200 members of the armed forces are being deployed to drive ambulances and staff border posts to tackle strikes this winter. Well, we're joined now by the Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster, Oliver Dowden. Mr Dowden, thank you so much for joining us on Sky News. Good morning to you.
Good morning.
I want to start with the nurses' strike. It's the first in NHS history. It's a good place to start, I suppose. Is there any wriggle room when it comes to pay? The NHS is a special case, one could put it to you. Nurses are using food banks, are unable to finish shifts because they can't hand over to anyone because there's no one to hand over to. Do you not think there should be an adjustment from the government and there should be a resolution to their pay?
Well, you're right that the NHS is a special case. That's why, for example, last year when public sector pay was frozen across the board, we gave a 3% pay rise for all those across the NHS. And that's why this year we gave it to the independent pay review body, and they came up with this number, which for the lowest paid across the NHS, in fact, everyone got £1,400, and for those on lower pay, that's a much higher
Wasn't that
percentage.
10 months ago, Mr Dowden?
Yes, but at the time that decision was made, the independent pay review body was aware of rising inflation. That's why, for example, they had a particular target for those on lower incomes. Now, of course, I would dearly love to give nurses the 19% pay rise that they would like, as would the Prime Minister. But the reason why we're not able to do that is for two reasons. First of all, the impact on public finances. If we gave just inflation across the board to everyone, that would cost households £1,000 per household over the course of the next year. In addition to that, and those of your viewers with longer memories will remember what happens if we allow payments to get out of control. That does stoke inflation. Now, what I want to do is make sure this initial economic stability that we're restoring means we grow the economy, have a stronger economy, and we can afford higher pay rises. The government is seeking to be reasonable in its approach, and I would urge all unions to be reasonable and to engage rather than to strike.
Those figures are quite interesting, Mr Dowden, because it's 28 million households. You're saying it'll cost each household £1,000 to meet this pay rise. Where did you get those figures from? Because if we look forward, inflation is set to drop to 5.5% in 2023-2024. That figure could be from around £400 to £500 per household. So are you misleading the public here?
Well, if the unions are willing to accept 5.5%, as you suggest, that's a totally different proposition. And for a number of people in the public sector, that is essentially what this pay settlement amounts to. Their demand is to have inflation at the current level, and for some it's what's called RPI, which is another measure of inflation, plus 5%, which takes you up to 19%. So that's a totally different proposition.
But the problem that we're seeing here is that more nurses are leaving the profession than coming into it. And one of the ways that you could secure a future for nurses is pay.
Yes, and we have given a pay rise determined by the independent pay review body, but that's not the only thing we're doing. We're recruiting a large number of additional nurses. We've got a target of 50,000. We're halfway along the path for that. For example, last year, the Royal College of Nursing asked for bursaries of £5,000, or in previous years they've asked for bursaries of £5,000, not repayable, to help people get into the profession. We've given that. I think we've given support with training, I think up to about £1,000. So we're taking a wide range of measures. It's not just in relation to pay.
But the route out of this is pay. Many nurses are saying we can't continue in this job. We can't heat our homes, we can't pay our bills. And yet 2 years ago, we all clapped for the NHS and for nurses. Isn't this the time to resolve it before Christmas to ensure the safety of the public?
Well, I desperately want us to have a resolution. I would say to all unions to call off these strikes and to give people a break over Christmas, give families a break, and give the military break. In respect of nurses, is precisely because of the value that we hold them in that we broke the overall freeze in public sector pay and gave them a rise last year.
so
and
sorry.
in addition to that, of course, it is the case that people will be able to get all sorts of other support. For example, there's £400 in relation to payments for energy. There's £150 on council tax.
How sustainable is this at the moment, though? Because the Chief of Defence Staff is saying, look, these contingency plans that you've brought in place to have 1,200 military personnel drive ambulances isn't enough. It doesn't go far enough. Are you worried about the Christmas period? And also, if someone calls up emergency services, they dial 999, they've broken a leg, a pensioner has fallen over, what will happen in that time? How long will an ambulance take to get to them?
Well, you've raised a number of different points there, and I think it's important that I try and address each of those for the benefit of your viewers. Now, in relation to the ambulance strikes, we have expressed significant concern about the impact that will have, and we would urge ambulance strike leaders to call it off even at this late stage. We are taking a range of contingencies, whether that's 600 military personnel for driving, 150 supporting in other roles, whether that's getting additional clinicians into the 999 call centres to make sure that people are dealt with on the calls, or whether that's getting volunteer responders as well. We are working incredibly hard to make sure, particularly in the most urgent cases, people are able to get that ambulance. Now, the advice remains the case that if you have a serious life-threatening incident, that you should still be able to call 999. If you have lesser problems, you should use 111 as before, and you may seek to use a transport to get to a hospital yourself. The only way we can remove all of this impact, the only way is for this to be called off. This is not a situation that we want to be in.
So, Mr Dowden, how are talks going with unions, in particular the Royal College of Nurses? How is it going? Where are we at the moment?
Well, remember, the Royal College of Nurses doesn't relate to the ambulance strike. That relates to the strike
nurses.
the
But where
day
are
before
we with
that. And the Health Secretary continues to engage with all unions relevant to his sectors on an ongoing basis, and that we want to find a resolution to this. But
are you hopeful there will be a resolution, Mr Dowden? Are you hopeful there will be a resolution?
Of course, I'm hoping that there will be a resolution, and I desperately I would love to be able to sit here now and say to you and say to all of your viewers, and particularly say to those nurses, we will give you a 19% pay rise. All
so
done
why
and dusted.
Can't that be done?
And the reason
if we're
why,
saying that
and
the
the
NHS
reason,
is
and
a
the
special
reason,
case,
and the reason,
why can't
if
that
you
be
allow
done?
me to finish my point, please, the reason why that can't be done is because of the cost to the public finances of a 19% pay rise. If you think about across the private sector, many of the people listening, public and private sector, are getting about 4%. Now, if we increase to 19%, that would have a huge impact on public finances. It's not my money, it's not the government's money, it's your viewers' money that is being spent.
We've gone over this, and you said that every household would have to pay
I don't think it would be a reasonable
and that's been disputed,
approach to
Mr
take.
Dowden. That figure's been disputed, of £1,000 every household. Our viewers don't like to be misled.
Well, I'm not misleading your viewers, and forgive me if you would please not keep interrupting me. I might be able to get some of these points out.
I'm here on behalf of our viewers,
in relation to the
these are the questions they want to hear from. So they want to know why a pay rise isn't possible, and you're telling our viewers that it would cost them £1,000, and that's simply been disputed.
If you'll allow me to answer the
Please go ahead.
Point. The £1,000 relates to if we gave across the public sector an inflation pay rise. That would be £1,000 for every household. That's £28 billion. In fact, the number would be higher if we matched the RPI plus 5%. That's the 19% which is being demanded in the RCN dispute. Now, as government ministers, we have to balance up very difficult choices. We have to make sure the sums add up for the public finances. We have to balance across what people are getting in the wider private sector, which is about 4%, and we have to balance up the inflationary impacts of this.
And the reason why
we remit this to an independent pay review body is precisely to take the politics out of this. And it's not just me saying this. This is what For example, the Shadow Chancellor for the Labour Party has also said we should respect the independent pay review processes. I think that's a reasonable approach to take. And the government is being reasonable in relation to this. I completely understand the pressures that people are under across the public and the private sector. For example, with the war in Ukraine driving up the cost of oil and energy as we recover from the COVID crisis. But I would say to union leaders, please give people a break this Christmas. We've got winter biting. Last year we had the threat of lockdown hanging over us. Things like the ambulance strike and the rail strike are not what families need this Christmas.
Mr Dowden, I don't think you answered my question there. The RNC have said that they want to compromise. Are you willing to meet them in the middle here?
Of course, we will always engage
So
with
what's
them.
the route out of this?
We will continue to engage with the RCN and with others. What I have sought to explain to you, and indeed to your viewers, is to understand why the government is taking this approach. We're trying to be reasonable in relation to this. However, we do have to balance off the wider public considerations in relation to this. This is what you would expect ministers to do in this kind of scenario. And I have to say to the union leaders, we will continue to be reasonable, but we also must be resolute in terms of protecting the wider public finances. And that's a difficult argument to make. I accept it's a difficult argument to make, and I would dearly love just for the government to be able to write the cheque for a massive for an increase in public sector pay, but we've put it through these public sector pay review bodies, and we're taking a reasonable and balanced approach, and I would urge the unions to take a similarly reasonable approach.
OK, Oliver Dowden, the Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster, thank you very much for joining us on Sky News today.